speak as a lawyer in I speak as a lawyer in England who, with colleagues, has on occasion represented the families of British men and women who have been tortured in Syrian jails. And even though those individuals had the status of being a citizen of another country, I am aware of how entrenched the practice was under the Assad regime of torture, and how even in the face of protest from another country, it was extremely difficult to get any accountability for what had been done, even in one case, in the face of the death of the person, a doctor, in prison. And Canada, the Canadian government, paid one of its citizens, Maha Ara, more than $1 million in compensation because the Canadian government, had not prevented his rendition to Syria where he was tortured. What this means is, for a very long time, the world has had every opportunity to be aware of what can happen, what has happened long before the recent 8-year conflict in Syria, in the hands of that regime. Now we have circumstances in which the regime has acquired a degree of confidence, and a degree of confidence because everything that is available to the international community to prosecute, to insist upon accountability for crimes against humanity being perpetrated by the regime, appear not to be being sustained. But yet, for the past decades, since shortly after the end of World War II, this body, the United Nations, brought into being the most magnificent statements, treaties, declarations, conventions on human rights. The flaw in the implementation is that it is the United Nations, the recognition of nation states as autonomous entities who have the responsibility themselves for implementing human rights for their citizens. And it is states who have taken upon themselves to decide who is human and what are to be the rights. And so in Syria now, in the report that is put out by IHH, that complements reports put out by the United Nations itself, reports put out by Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, there are and have been thousands of women and children in prisons in Syria being tortured, executed, disappear without trace. And now death certificates are being issued with the confidence of a regime which believes perhaps the conflict is coming to an end and it has survived intact, that believes it has the immunity and the impunity to inform families whose relatives disappeared years before that they died and ask them to sign a certificate to acknowledge it was from a natural cause. That raises the fear that this, in fact, is not the end of a crisis, but perhaps the beginning of a further crisis. And that is, if women have been killed, tortured, hanged in Syrian prisons, and are being now there is more to come. And yet the world has all of its provisions that are embodied in the law that was generated by this organization, the United Nations, has all of that at its disposal, but has failed comprehensively to bring about any recognition by the regime that it is answerable to the world at large. There is so much that could be being pressed for. There is so much. The working group on arbitrary detention can respond to individual petitions. Committee on Torture has a duty to press to go in and inspect the prisons. International Red Cross, the same. There is committee after committee sitting in this building that has the ability to press and press. There are nations that have the ability to press Syria to say, you may have escaped for the moment, but you are not going to escape forever if the international community combines and utilizes what it has. What was enacted at the end of World War II, that countries would police each other and would never allow atrocities to happen again, such as are happening in Syrian prisons. And it is right to focus on the position of women and children, because it is finite, it is answerable, it can be dealt with and it can be solved. An insistence that they be released, an insistence that they be restored to some sort of normal life if they can be. This is something that is solvable. It is not war. It is not involving necessary international decision-making and conflict solving. This is a demand that could be made on the basis of law that exists, complex law with well-equipped bodies to be pressed to utilize it. So we are here to articulate the rightness of what exists, the rightness of what is meant to be in law, that the Syrian regime one day will have to account for, one day may face the International Criminal Court, not just the leaders of the regime, but those in the prisons who have carried out the atrocities and are still carrying them out. One day, perhaps, they will be answerable. But in the meantime, they should know that the sooner releases can take place, the fewer deaths, the fewer atrocities, the fewer casualties, then the time has begun for the rule of law to be established as it was always intended to be by this international body and by our collectivity in committing ourselves to never again let what is happening now happen again. Thank you.